Well, last night after our Christmas Eve service, my family and I got together and did our normal Christmas Eve feast and all of that. Did a little bit of trivia, and as we did that, we talked about various films, various Christmas films, some of which some of us had seen and some of which others of us had not seen. Because there's a lot of them out there, right? And many of you may have seen many of these films already, or may be getting ready to. And as we watch them, as we see these different films, we see various different explanations for what Christmas is all about. It seems there are just so many out there. Some of them, many of them, have to do with love. Love for our families, our loved ones, for our friends and those around us. But there are very few that focus on the most important love of all. Not just our love for God, but rather for God's love for us. Now this day, this Christmas day, also has many names attached to it, just as there are many movies about it. There's Christmas, literally Christ Mass. There's the Feast of the Nativity. And there's another name, the Feast of the Incarnation. Because God became incarnate as a human being on this day. Incarnate is an interesting word. Literally, it means into flesh. Or rather, we could say made flesh. And it really has that sense about it, doesn't it? Carnate. It sounds very earthy, very gritty. And that makes sense because of the way that we think about flesh, the physicality of it all. We tend to look at the flesh as a bad thing. Think about the jokes that we tell about the physical side of things, about our bodies. We laugh at it. We often mock it. We certainly talk about trying to keep our passions, our bodies, our flesh in check. And that's something that we as humans have done since ancient times. Sometimes the word you even hear for it is keeping a bridle on our flesh, on our bodies. We look at our bodies, our flesh, as a bad thing. And yet, God didn't. God didn't look down on our flesh, on our bodies. God, in fact, became flesh, became a physical being in this world. God didn't look down on doing that. God went in and became incarnate, became in flesh with one of us. God didn't look down on being with us in the nitty-gritty. In fact, we have great stories of Jesus getting down in the dirt, getting down in all of it with us. Jesus famously heals a blind man by taking mud from the earth, spitting in it, using his own spit, and putting that in this man's eyes in order to heal him. God was born in a cave with a manger, placed in a feeding trough for the animals. That was the level of difficulty and physicality in his birth. God didn't look down on doing that. God was willing to be born into this earth, born into a manger even, born just as each and every one of us are. And in fact, God was willing even to become a corpse, to be dead, just as all of us one day will be. God was willing to do that even, in order to turn death backwards for us and give us the chance and opportunity of everlasting life. We often look down on the flesh, but God doesn't. God was willing to be infleshed for us. And thank goodness that while we might look down on that, God did not. God was willing to become infleshed for us. God was willing to die as a physical human being for us. That is the depth of God's love. That self-sacrificial love, that he was willing to die for us. That's the kind of love that God had for us, the kind of love that God calls us to have for one another as well. And that love that God had for us, that self-sacrificial love, that love that was willing to come down to be incarnate, to be enfleshed, to get down in the nitty-gritty of this life and of this earth. That willingness, that love that God had for us. That is the true meaning of Christmas. That is the true love that we wish to celebrate here at Christmas today. That love that God shows for us, and our love in recognizing that love, in celebrating that love, and in worshiping and in giving thanks to God for that love. That is a very countercultural thing. Make no mistake. Celebrating this love is very countercultural. It's why we don't hear about it a lot. Hear about not just giving that love to other people, but showing that love back to God, that same love that God shows to us. We don't talk about it a lot. We don't celebrate it a lot. In fact, being here this morning is a very countercultural thing as well. Because we would want to relegate celebrating that love just to Christmas Eve, to just keep it there. But that's why we are all here today, for that counter-cultural love. We are here today to celebrate the love that God had for us. That love that God was willing to be incarnate for one of us, for all of us. And why else would we want to celebrate or get together at all anyways? But to celebrate that love, that self-sacrificial, incarnate love that God gave to each and every one of us here and to all of the world.